And then I brought forward all my skills and talents and gifts, and God said, well, Mark, you really can't give those back to me at this time because they were from me in the beginning anyway. So I have an abundance of skills and talents and gifts. They are not a worthy offering. And he pushed them aside. And then I brought forward all my accomplishments, and I thought surely something in here is going to be worth a gift to God. And I said, Lord, look at what I have done. For goodness sakes, I was a Presbyterian minister. And Jesus said, well, that's very impressive. However, in the kingdom of God, we have no shortage of religious sorts of people. And then I pulled out my ace, and I said, Lord, I was once the moderator of the Presbyterian Church in Canada. And Jesus said, my word, he said, we've never had one of those before. And he calls over St. Peter, and St. Peter comes over, and Jesus said, this man was once the moderator of the Presbyterian Church. And Peter said, my goodness, that's amazing. We should step aside and let him run heaven. And I said, all right, Jesus and Peter, I get the message. You don't have to be sarcastic about it. And I had nothing. All my treasures were worthless in God's sight. Jesus pushed them away. And I was filled with anger at Jesus for telling me that my treasures were worthless things. And I began to storm away in disgust, and Jesus said, wait a minute, Mark, come back and let me look at your life and see if I can find an offering that is worthy of the kingdom of God. And so, since the options were very limited, I went back to Jesus. And Jesus put his hands down into that box where all the days of my life were contained, and he brought his hands up out of the box. When he brought them up, I heard the strangest sound. I heard the sound of the singing of birds. And mixed in with the sound of the singing of birds, I heard laughter. Laughter echoing across the great halls of paradise. And Jesus said, here is your treasure. Here is an offering worthy of the King of Kings. Here is the most valuable thing you have. And I said, Lord, what is it? I hear the sound of the singing of birds, and I hear laughter. How can you say those things are treasures? He said, Mark, don't you remember this day in your life? And I listened. I remember. The laughter was my laughter, and the laughter of my son Samuel. And I remembered the day that we had gone out on a hike through the woods, and we went to a place where the people said, if you put birdseed on your hand and hold your hands out, the chickadees will come and rest upon your hands and eat the seed from them. Sam was about 10 years old, and I said to him, Sam, do you want to go for a walk in the forest and feed the birds? And he was about as excited as that as any other 10-year-old would have been. Not at all. He said, that's boring. And I said, come on. He said, no. He said, I'm watching TV. That's boring. And I finally dragged him out and took him for the walk in the forest and made him stand there with his hands out like this, waiting for the birds. And he waited and he waited and he waited, and he said, "This is boring!" But finally, one bird came down and landed in his right hand. And the second bird came and landed on his left hand. And then there was the great sound of the singing of the birds and the flutter of their wings in the trees. And then the chickadees came down, 5 and 6 and 10, and landed on his head and his shoulders. And they jumped down his arm, and each took their turn at feeding from the seeds and flew away and circled and came back. And Sam began to laugh. He began to laugh so hard that he fell on his knees. And I laughed with him, and the sound of our laughter raised up and joined in the sound of the singing of the birds. And now Jesus was saying to me, "This was your treasure, Mark. This is the most valuable thing you have had in your life. Sound of your laughter, mixing with the sound of the singing of the birds." And I said, "Lord, explain it to me." And the Lord said, "Don't you see, in that moment you experienced the pure joy of being alive? And that is why I made you, to be alive, to experience life, and to laugh with joy and thanksgiving just for the gift of being." Offer me your laughter, Mark. You will be offering me a treasure beyond all your riches and all your talents and all your accomplishments. Offer me your laughter. And I gave it to Jesus, my pure joy. And then Jesus put his hands into the box of the days of my life again. And this time when he brought them out, they were cupped together. And in the middle of Jesus' cupped hands, there was a pool of clear liquid. And Jesus said, "Here is your treasure. Offer me this." And I said, "Lord, what is it?" And I did not know. And Jesus said to me, "Mark, do you remember the day when your big sister died? And you wept and wept and wept." I was there, Mark. I held out my hands, and I gathered your tears as they fell hot and salty from your cheeks. And on the day when your best friend died, and every time you wept, I gathered your tears.